Hi, and this is Frankie.
Hello.
Um, this is Social Worker Life with Kim Beam, and today we have Frankie on. Uh, Frankie and I first met each other when Frankie was younger, and in a different space and place in time, and living uh, a high school experience when I knew Frankie. Right, I was actually Frankie's English teacher for how many? Like 3 semesters, 2 semesters?
I think you were my creative writing teacher for one, but then I just hung out in your classroom beyond that. And that's, yeah.
Yeah. I used to make the joke, I still kind of make the joke that I had sort of this weird cult following.
Oh, you definitely did. No, you did. You and Ashbrook both did.
Oh, yeah. Zimmerman did too, but I don't know if you ever met Zimmerman.
I knew of him, but I didn't know him.
You didn't know him. You and Zim would have gotten along well.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Frankie, and Frankie has a story.
Yeah.
So where does Frankie want to start their story?
So, I guess we can honestly start in high school because I feel like that's when I met you, and that's also when a lot of like my identity and personhood was doing a lot of things that make a lot more sense now. so so yeah. So we met, obviously I was in high school. I grew up in a very small town in Maryland. And I don't think I really understood how small it was until I went beyond it and I realized like, oh, there's major highways and I can go a million different places and there's not one main road that I know how to drive on. Like there's so many options everywhere else. Um, but yeah, I think that growing up in that town, I everyone kind of knew each other where I was. And but what was interesting is because I had moved there when I was a little bit older, I kind of was the new kid for a while in school, and I never really felt like I fit into that space very well, um, because I didn't have these like long friendships with everybody around me. Um, but I landed there fresh off of a child of divorce situation in elementary school that just kind of followed me through my adolescence, obviously. But yeah, high school for me, I think, was when I really started to get past that part of my life and actually understand who I was as a person, right? Because
Mhm.
when you're a little kid and you have that kind of trauma, it takes you a long time to get to a point where you're even allowed to like see who you are after that. So for me, that was a huge part of my life in high school was figuring out who I was, or who I thought I was, right? Because that
Mhm.
changes a lot.
It does. It's very fluid who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And part of the problem with that also is we get put in roles by people around us.
Hmm.
And so I noticed that there were times I would go home and I would revert back to being the person I was when I was growing up in that house rather than being who I was as a full blown adult with my own thoughts and opinions and decision making abilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a lot of what that time is like. And I think for me, there was this added layer because my family on my dad's side at least was very, very religious.
You
And that's
said
what I
was or is.
is currently. I think there have been some splitting off of different family members who've left it, but he has remained the very religious one.
That would
uh,
be your dad.
that is my dad, correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that was what I grew up with. But I realized in high school that wasn't really who I was anymore. But I still had to go back home when I was off of school and go to Bible study. I had to wake up and go to church on Sunday, and I was doing all the things, but nothing really felt true to who I was a lot of the time. And I remember there's a lot of really big lessons I think you learn in church as a high schooler,
Mhm.
especially because the church knows that you are becoming a young person and finding your identity, and they have a lot of thoughts and opinions about that time. So I remember part of this like identity switching I had to do is I had this group of friends in high school that I was really close with. And I remember going home one time and my dad made a comment about one of my friends and being like, I think your friend is gay. And I was like, okay. And I didn't really know what he meant. I was like, what? So like, what does that mean? You know, I knew just from going to school, to church and growing up in that that was like something we didn't talk about. But now that I was in high school, apparently we needed to talk about it. And my dad said, well, we love them, we love your friend, but we need to pray for them. And that was kind of like where it was left for that initial conversation. And I was like meant to infer whatever I was supposed to infer from that.
And what did you infer from that?
So yeah, I think it's a lot of, I feel like a lot of church stuff. There's my cat walking by. This is Pippin.
Hello, Pippin.
Say hello. He's doing his own thing,
That's
but
okay. You can do it. It's a cat. I think that's by definition what they do.
that's true. Especially but I feel like there's a lot of stuff in church where they don't always connect the dots for you, but they talk around it a lot. So hearing that and having all these other dots that were planted through me, which is like, man and woman, you're going to marry a man when you grow up, all this stuff. I was like, okay. So if my friend is someone we should pray for, then that's not okay, I guess. Or maybe there's something wrong, or, like that's what you assume, because we don't pray for people who are doing really well, right? The prayer list is always the people who are sick or not doing hot.
Exactly. Or causing their parents angst.
Exactly. Right. Yes. So that was kind of where he left that initial conversation. And I remember going to that friend, and I didn't really know what to do with that information, because part of that, there was also an understanding that like I could do something to pray for this person, to help this person, because that's also a lot of the narrative I was fed at home was we, the Christians, need to help other people become good people, which was become Christian back then.
Right.
So I didn't really say anything to my friend for a while, but I thought a lot. I was thinking a lot about, well, this isn't okay because this is what I'm hearing. And I do feel really bad for my friend. So I started to internalize a lot of that, even though I didn't necessarily say anything to this person or really do anything with that information. But
or with the pressure your dad put on you.
Right. Or with the pressure that my dad, who is an adult, put on a 15, 16-year-old child. I think about that a lot too, that I was, you're a kid in that time and your parents in the church are saying, go evangelize people. And you're like, okay, I don't know what to do about that. But yes. So I think from that, through high school, like I don't think I tried to find a boyfriend to like stop anything from happening. I was just like, that's my next step. That's a normal thing people do. But I remember like not really feeling anything for anybody ever, really. Like that was never something that I really felt towards at least the high school boys that I met. But I let myself follow into the pattern that like my dad's saying, oh, the friends that aren't gay, look at what they're doing. Like that's the correct thing. So when there was a boy that had attention that they were giving me, I was like, all right, that's sure, I guess this is it, and that's what you did.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think through that I was in like a lot of those just high school relationships that are like, meh, we dated for a week and then I'm gonna do something else now, bye. And I was always the one that like broke up with the boy and was like, I don't know, I'm gonna go do something else. And I think there was a couple times where I literally told the person, I don't think you're ready to be dating yet. And I think what I was thinking is, I don't think I am feeling anything here. So it must be this person that's the problem, because I'm doing all the right things that the Christian and friends around me are telling me to do.
Right.
Right. So there was then like my senior year, I think, was where I had this really big relationship. And I think it's funny because I feel like that's when I started, no, I guess my junior year. That's when I was in, I think, your creative writing class. So I'm sure you know this person and you know who this was, which yeah.
Yep.
But I ended up dating.
I mean, I couldn't pull his name out now at all.
No.
Like I couldn't pull out his name if I even.
That's fine.
No. Nope. Wouldn't. Yeah. Nope.
Yeah. But I ended up dating him through to my senior year even, because we dated toward the end of his and kind of into mine. And it was like, what I expected it to be in a lot of senses. But I think that there's a lot of stuff that happened in that relationship that I didn't know wasn't right or wasn't okay, but people don't talk about that. And especially if the narrative you get from Christianity is, along with pray for your friend is gay, don't have sex, be abstinent, all that good stuff. Once you cross that boundary, there's no roadmap for what is correct and what is safe and what is good, for a lot of people. And I think that's, for me, what I felt is like I crossed that line, and then it was like my ship is gone and now I don't know what to do.
Oh, yeah.
But follow this person and do what he says, because that he seems like he knows what he's doing.
Right.
Yeah,
He says to trust him, so I guess I will.
right, exactly. So through that, I think, obviously that relationship went on for maybe like 9 months. It wasn't that long in the grand scheme of my life, but that ended right before I went to college. And it really was that I didn't even realize until my freshman year of college, going into that, I was able to kind of process what happened in that relationship and understand why it was so just wrong and just so uncomfortable for me. And initially, that was because there was a lot of parts of that relationship that were abusive, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And because that's not something that I was talked with about, I didn't know what to do with those things.
Yep.
They happened to me and I experienced them, Yeah.
I'm sorry
So,
that happened.
yeah, me too, it's it's not a great thing, but it happens to so many people. And I think it
It
happens to
really
so many,
does.
right. And I think it happens to so many people who are socialized as female or as women when they're young, because we're not taught to have a lot of agency. When you combine the Christianity over that, I think it puts people in a really difficult place to be able to see what is safe and good, like I said. So all those layers on a little high schooler.
Yeah, yeah. So much pressure. And they're totally adult scenarios for somebody whose frontal cortex is just not in a place to be
Not
able to
there.
handle
Mm-mm.
adult scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah. But the reality is, I think you are faced with that sometimes when you're a teenager. And if people don't talk about it because they don't think it exists or it's not the right thing for you to be doing, then you don't know the answers.
Right.
Hmm.
So tangenting off of that,
Yeah.
if you looking back on you as a teenager and looking back at the experience you had, if you could talk to little Frankie back then,
Hmm.
who would you advise Frankie to go to for perspective?
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is we've talked a little bit about my dad, who, if you can't tell, is not the safest person for me in that time of my life. But what I didn't know is my mom actually, my mom is somebody who today is like my champion, I call her. She is somebody who's a huge part of my life, and has really supported me through so much of it. But she was put in the role of being the meek Christian woman for a long time. And I didn't know that she was a safe person I could talk to, because that's who she was when I grew up. And even when my parents did divorce, she was still my parent. She was still my mom. And I didn't know that that was a boundary that she didn't have, or we could talk about those things if I had reached out, but I just didn't know that that was an option. Um, and I think saying that, like, there's nothing that she did or could have done that would have made a difference, right? Because I don't want it to seem as if, oh, my mom, if she had just reached out, I could have talked to somebody, because that's not what it is. I think there is a lot of pressure that I put on myself as a kid, where I didn't feel comfortable talking to adults about those types of things, because those are boundaries that I learned as a kid. You don't talk about sex with adults. You don't talk about like these bad things that happen with adults. Which is funny, because I would tell kids, talk to an adult, talk to a safe person, and that's not what I wanted to do. Yeah. Um,
I don't know if you remember, but at one point, I remember you telling me that your mom thought you were gay
mhm.
and you
Yeah,
were really mad at her.
I was very mad. And and that is something that came up not just that one time, and every time I was so mad. And now I know, like, well, kid, you had a lot to learn. Like, gay was just step number like 1.0, and then there's all these other things that I've had to discover since then. But yeah, and she was approaching it as like, you can talk to me if you are, and I was like, no, you're
No.
wrong, absolutely not, no. So yeah, but of course now I'm telling myself, little Frankie, you should have talked to your mom. So yeah, but I think like moving into my freshman year of college, with all the background I had as being a Christian throughout all of my childhood. I went to a Christian college because that was my option. So I ended up going to a college called Messiah. And what's funny about Messiah is that if you talk to any other Christian colleges, they think that Messiah is a bunch of heathens and like the liberal kids go to Messiah, which I think is really funny in the grand scheme of like, this is a private Christian college where you sign a like 10 commandment type document when you start attending as a student, and this is considered liberal. Okay. But with that, there was actually
It's so funny you say that because I went to Gordon,
yeah,
which is also considered one of the most liberal of the Christian colleges.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And it too had the 10 commandment contract you had to sign.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was what, the chapel once a week. We had to go twice a week, like all
We
of
had to go 3 times.
Oh
3 times a week.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But there were
that's
also
fun
the chapel
school.
skippers who would sit up in the balcony and read the newspaper and do their homework during chapel. Like you knew,
Oh yeah,
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 there were definitely people who got the tapes because they wouldn't pass if they didn't listen to the
yes.
chapel tapes and fill
If
out
you
the.
had a friend that was a card swiper, you'd be like, hey,
Yes.
yes. I love that that's a universal experience.
Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who are listening and didn't go to a Christian college, chapel was mandatory, and you had to like punch in to prove that you were there. The way that you would buy food in the meal in the cafeteria and you would punch your meal, you had to like swipe your card to get into chapel to prove that you had attended. And so there would be somebody who would show up with like 7 cards, and they would go to their friend, and their friend would just be like 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, give these all back. And then they attended chapel because their card was swiped, but they were probably off in the woods, like, communing with trees and having a better time being druids. Like,
Yep. Or if you were me, I actually was able to get out of chapel my senior year because I was working. And if you were working off campus for so many hours, they'd let you skip. But I wasn't working enough hours. So I got my boss to lie to them and tell them I was working more hours than I was. And then I could also skip. You learn how to work the system. You really do.
So I had a friend who was a chapel skipper. And she actually didn't get her diploma for a very long time. They held her diploma and she never made up the chapels and she didn't do anything. And then eventually one day her diploma just arrived in the mail.
Right. Because like, what can they do?
What can they really do? So yeah, I think it was like 3 years later, her diploma just like shows up because the only reason she didn't graduate wasn't because of credits and wasn't because of actual learning. It was because she didn't go to chapel. And she's like, this is dumb. I'm not making this up. And you can keep the piece of paper. Right.
Yeah.
I have a transcript that says I graduated. You can keep the piece of paper. And she said it just arrived in the mail one day.
Oh my God. They're like, I guess you're a full grown adult now and you're not going to ever fix this. So here.
We did what we could when we had you.
Ugh. Well, that's funny because so part of that 10 commandment doctrine we had to sign, there was actually a caveat in there about same-sex couples. And so there was a rule, and it's funny because I think most most Christian campuses have something like this, and I think it's what's the word, like disciplined in different ways. So the rule that we had on paper was that you could not show affection to the same sex on campus, like at all.
You couldn't hug, like 2 girls just couldn't squeal and like,
so,
oh, and give a hug.
Right. So like that was part of the things that we would as students. So part of my journey as a college kid was finding this group called the Underground, which is basically all the queer students who happened to find themselves in this Christian college found each other because of course we did. And and we would talk about things like this and be like, so what does that mean? And we would go to administrators and bring that up and be like, so what, I can't hold my friend's hand, are you gonna like do something about that? And we would try to just poke holes in the policies and get them to understand how ridiculous it was. But that was kind of their general idea, was like, well, it can't be like an affectionate romantic sign of affection in public. And we were like, well, what does that mean? And there was never a good answer, but the policy was still the policy.
Yes.
But through that I found this group, like I said, called the Underground. And it was really, I got really lucky because a person that I had knew throughout my upbringing, going to youth group and going to church, ended up going to Messiah. And I actually went there partially because I knew him. And like, I was like, he's there, I'm going to go there. That's the school I'll pick. And there was a couple other people I knew, but he was part of the underground and was the one that was like, hey, Frankie, have you heard of the underground before? And it was like, we were walking from like the dining hall one day and I was like, I don't know what that is. I think I saw, there was one day on campus when I saw like a URL and it was like a Tumblr URL that was just like tumblr.com/the underground at Messiah. And like, that's how this group was operating because they couldn't be a recognized student club.
Right. No, they couldn't be. They actually had to be underground.
Yeah, literally. We met in the basement of one of the academic buildings. So literally underground.
Wait, now I just want to give our listeners like context.
Yeah.
We're talking like 2005 here?
No, we're talking 2014 was my freshman year. And then
really?
I graduated in 2018. Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute. I left Northeast in 2012.
You left before I did.
Oh,
Yeah.
I did. I thought I left your senior year or before your senior year. I thought you were really.
I think the year that I had your creative writing class, you might have had like one more year, but I graduated 2014 from Northeast.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is less than 10 years ago. You had to have an underground group on a Christian campus because you were questioning your orientation.
Yeah. And I wasn't even at the point, I think when he invited me to this group, I was at the point where I realized the stuff my dad had told me all those years ago about like your friend's gay, pray for them wasn't good. I mean, it wasn't okay. And I was like, I can be an ally. So I'm going to go to this group because it's for queer people and allies. And I'll go and support and kind of see what this is about. But I wasn't at a point where I accepted anything about myself or really knew anything about myself. I was just like, I'm an ally. I don't have a problem with gay people. I'll go to this group. And I still wonder, I wish I could, and I totally could reach out to him, but I want to ask my friend, like, did you know, like, did you invite me because you knew, or do you
Were you like my mom?
Yeah, like what? Did you see this in me and you were like, they'll figure it out. I'm just gonna bring them here and then, let them see how it is. So, but that was my freshman year. And then my sophomore year was sort of when I had transitioned from being like, I'm just an ally to being like, I think this is something else. I think that there's more to this than just like, I'm a straight person who is friends with queer people. But I didn't know what to do with that. And I think that something that a lot of people bring up when they talk about why people are gay, why people are trans, that is not true in any way, but they talk a lot about trauma and they talk a lot about a trauma happened and that changed you and now you're this way. And so I'm going to say this, like saying that I do not believe that. I don't think that is true. And I don't think that people who are harmed by someone of the opposite gender automatically are no longer attracted to that, right? That's not how sexuality works. But sophomore year, Frankie was definitely thinking about that relationship I had my senior year of high school. And I still had a lot of unpacked emotions about that. And so I knew that I was not comfortable around men. But I didn't know what to do with that because even though I could be an ally for gay people and that was fine, I was still a part of me that was like, I can't call myself that though. Like I can't be queer, I can't be gay. So maybe I'm just asexual. Maybe I don't feel sexual attraction at all to anybody. Maybe that's why all my past relationships felt so weird. So maybe I'm just asexual, which asexuality is a spectrum, but is the idea of you don't necessarily experience sexual or even romantic attraction to people to different degrees. So I was like, maybe that's what I'm dealing with and that's who I am. And that didn't last very long because that wasn't true, right? You can say that about yourself. And I'm
because at that point you were just oriented in one direction.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm just not attracted to that type of person. So therefore I must be asexual because the definition that's been given to me of a relationship is a man versus a man and a woman. Like that's the definition that's been handed to me. And because a man doesn't do it for me, I must be asexual.
Right. Exactly. And that was the conclusion I landed on for like maybe like a month. And then there's like a girl in the underground that I thought was cute, and I was like, this is not okay. So I'm not asexual because I like this person. So the way it goes, it's like it wasn't like I was necessarily like trying on hats of different things, but I was just trying to go with what I was feeling in the moment. And in the moment, when you're still figuring out who you are, that shifts so much.
Right. So along with that,
Mhm.
looking back at young Frankie now, knowing that when you look at this girl, she's cute. Oh, she's cute. I'm not asexual. I'm not heterosexual, right? Looking back at young Frankie in high school and elementary school, were there moments where you were like, she's cute,
Yeah.
but you didn't go in that direction and you didn't let
Right.
yourself go in that direction?
Yeah. There's there's like a joke that people make that's like, do I want to be your friend or do I want to be with you? Like, I don't know which one it is. And I think that is something that I recognize now. There was a lot of emotions when I was a kid that were little crushes, but I was just like, no, that girl's really cool and I want to be her friend. But that's not what it was.
But that was
Because
the definition that you had at the
yeah,
time. So that was the
exactly.
language you had.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So I'm like, she's really cool. I'll be her friend, and that's where that'll be. And that felt fine when I was a kid, but now and going into college, I realized it was more than that. So after I had bounced from asexuality, I landed into, well, maybe I can be bisexual because I recognize I experience an attraction to women. I was like, I think maybe I could be attracted to men. I recognize I have this trauma. Maybe that's something. So I'm going to hold on to this still because that's still a possibility. Um, and I think part of that too was because when you're a bisexual Christian, um, you love who you love, but it's easier to follow the rules sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can't choose who you end up with, but I think that you can bear a lot and you can make a lot of things work for safety and for acceptance. And that's what a lot of people do. So that was kind of my plan. It was like, well, I have this crush on women. I'm going to give guys another go and just see if I can be bisexual and make that work. And a lot of that was hinging on the fact that I knew back home, at least from my understanding, my dad was not going to be okay with it. My dad at that point was still financially supporting me in some capacities. And that was really scary to think that I might not be able to go to college because there's loans that have been co-signed. I might not be able to, like, after college, am I going to be able to fall back and go home for a little bit and find myself? Or is that going to be cut off for me now? So there are a lot of resources you have to think about when you're deciding who you are and who you're comfortable knowing that. And again, I was figuring all that out as like a 19, 20-year-old.
Again, frontal cortex not completely developed
Out
yet.
there. Exactly. So, yeah. So in college, I did end up shockingly at a Christian college dating women and being in relationships with girls. Because what I learned very quickly, and what I think a lot of us in the underground realized, is that a lot of the rules were more for funders and like people on the board of the college, and they didn't like us and they wanted those rules to be in place. But you could find professors and even admin that were safe and were like, okay. So I got to a point, I think my senior year, where I was just like, fuck it, I'm going to just do this. And if there's a problem, I'm a student leader. I have a really good GPA. Like, I'm all these things to this college. So what can they do to me? Um, and I was
Can
pretty openly, oh, yeah.
I just had a thought pop in my head too. And all those rules,
Mhm.
every one of those rules is geared toward a heterosexual relationship.
Yes.
Those rules are not geared towards homosexual relationships. So you
Mm-mm.
can have a sleepover with 7 women in a room,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and we
right?
would use that because you can close the door if it's
Yes,
not someone of the opposite gender. That's another rule a lot of them have, is you leave the door a foot
you have
open
to
if
leave the
you're one
door
boy
open,
or a
and
girl.
all feet have to be on the floor.
Yes, but if it's just two girls, I want to close that door.
You can close the door if you want to.
Yeah, so there are a lot of like loopholes, but I think because I was really open about things, I had like one leader who was my advisor for this club we ended up starting. I guess this is something important to talk about, is after the underground, because we as students bothered admin so much, and I think just like really talked with them one-on-one and forced them to like meet and talk with us so much, they gave us something. And that something was SAGE, which was sexuality and gender education. That's what it stood for. um, the way they got away with that is they branded it to like the college in general as this is a group where you can talk about your sexuality in a Christian context. That's not what we were doing in that group at all. But that is, at least when I was there, because I was one of the student leaders my senior year. And, you know, once we all left, we're not sure what happened with the group, but it was a group of queer students that would meet and talk about policy and talk to admin, and just we talked about even things like being safe in a relationship of the same gender, because that's another thing that isn't talked about, is like, what does abuse look like in a same-sex relationship? So they're really important conversations to be having as young 20-year-olds that, oh, there's a cat under my laptop.
That's okay. You're fine.
You know, these really important conversations that just weren't being offered to anybody. So we were like, we're going to make that space. But by the time I was my senior year, I was that student leader. And so my leader was like, listen, I know this about you. I know that you're going to like date people and probably not care because you're a senior now. But he said to me, as a student leader, as somebody that is leading by example and servant leadership and all these fun Christian buzzwords they throw at you.
Yeah.
He told me, what would it mean for you to put this part of your life on hold for the next year to really like devote yourself to this position? And then once you graduate, that's a part of yourself you can explore. So what he was basically saying to me was, as a student leader, I think you should not act on any of these feelings you're having and just be single and celibate for a year as a 20-year-old around, you know, all these people who are in relationships, who are getting married their freshman year if they're straight. Why don't you put your life on hold for a year, and then you can be gay when you leave this place? And he compared it to Jesus being sacrificial. To which my first thought was, I'm not Jesus, right? I am a person.
Exactly. You're not the God, like one in the three of the Godhead, right?
Right, exactly, right.
If
So
if you subscribe to that Godhead.
right. But that's what he was asking of me. And I took that conversation and I ignored him, because a big part of me was like, that's, you know, you can think that, but I don't agree with that. And I know that's not true. And if I went to you and said, you're a leader on this campus, why don't you separate with your wife for your entire employment here? And then you can date her when you leave this campus, right? Like that would not fly for somebody like that. So
Right.
I really just, you know, was like, screw it. And I just did what I wanted to do and became who I was. Which another big hoop that kind of turned into for me was, once I graduated, I ended up landing in Harrisburg, which is a city that I have learned a lot of queer people from Messiah end up here. I don't know if it's just because it's close, or if it's like we find jobs and we just stay here and we find the community and we like it. But I swear, like every other day I'm talking to a person who's queer and I'm like, did you go to Messiah? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, we have the same journey, got it. But I landed in the city and I made friends with a really good group of people that is still like my chosen family to this day. And one of my like main really close people, who's like my parent, I feel like one of my chosen parents in this family, is trans. And when I first met them, we didn't really talk about it at all. Like it was just, that's who they were and that's who they were to me, and everything like that was fine. But
Right.
I think as I started to see who they were and learn more about them and just see like the beautiful person that they were, and the beautiful person that they had been able to become, I realized that there was a part of myself that was like reaching towards that life, but there was this part of me that was like, no, you have to stay here. And I didn't know what that was exactly. Like I didn't know if I was trans. I didn't know if it was like just an identity like switch that I needed to go through. But I knew that there's a part of me that was really drawn to them and felt this kinship towards them that I didn't really understand yet. But I think that's something that's really powerful about finding chosen family, right? Because you can meet those people who have gone through the same journey as you, and are on the other side. And it's almost like you're looking, I think a lot about like having a future me, a current me, and then a past me at all times. And so I think about my friend and thinking about how like they were the person that I saw as like not my exact future self, but the person that I wanted to feel like. Like I want to feel the way you feel about
Right.
myself, right?
They were embodied in their body, and they
Yes.
were able to be present in their body, and they
Hmm.
were able to love wholly from their heart and their being from within the frame they lived in.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
their contentment inside themselves was something that you wanted for yourself,
Hmm. Yeah.
if
Yeah.
I'm hearing that all correctly.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like I understood a lot of that without having the language for it yet. Um, and that's something that I think is like a theme in a lot of lives of queer people, of trans people, of people all across the spectrum, because you find stuff out about yourself so much later in life, I feel, than a lot of other people. And then you do this rediscovery, and it's like, oh, this was all here this whole time, but now I have to like figure out what that means for the past and the future me and the current me. Like, what does all that look like? Um,
So you're, in a way, you unpack history
yeah,
under the new lens and be
exactly.
like, this thing happened. And now that I know this about me, this makes this whole thing make sense in a completely different way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's like, it's rewarding. It's also sometimes a little heartbreaking when you see those moments where you're like, I knew, part of me knew, and I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew something. But through just being with that friend group and just having more space in the city, away from a college that was really controlling to adults, which is still wild to me to think about now. um, I was able to really access that part of myself and like allow that part of myself to come out. And what became me now is somebody who, I go by Frankie. I recognize myself as being trans and being somebody who doesn't align with the gender I was born with. But I also recognize that there's a capacity in me to experience gender in a lot of different ways. So I call myself trans non-binary, which to me is like I've transcended gender. That is something a friend of mine said. They're like, you've transcended gender, so you're trans, right? When I was not sure about that label yet. Well, they're like, well, you transitioned, you transcended, you left, so you're trans.
Yes.
And the non-binary part is me understanding and giving space for like the different ways I experience femininity and masculinity that aren't necessarily a woman or a man, but as somebody who's more in between. Um, and when I realized that, it was like, since then, I've been like more happy than I think I've been in a long time. I think a lot of people in my life have seen that happen and have seen me like become someone who they're proud of because I'm able to be proud of myself and able to say like, this is who you are and this is who you always were. You just had to find that part of yourself and you had to unpack all those layers and find the Frankie that was within you under the layers that society and family and all these other aspects of the world had put on me, that hid who I really was from myself.
Right.
Um, yeah. Um, and it's interesting because in conversations with those people who can see like those changes in me and can see how happy I am, I've learned more about those moments when I was younger where this all made sense, right? Like my mom within the past 2 years actually shared with me that there's a yearbook, and I don't remember if it was third grade or fifth grade, but it was an elementary school yearbook. And one of the projects we had to do, they had like a little like, what's your favorite color, what's your favorite whatever questionnaire that we all filled out, right? One of the questions was, if you could be anything for a day, what would you be? And me as an elementary schooler, third or fifth grade, had wrote, I think it would be cool to be a boy for a day. And
Oh,
that
really?
was there, yeah. So like all along, at least that young, there were moments where I had that thought of like, I think I'm not quite this box that I was put in, and I can only see one other box possibility. So what would that be like? And now I know that there's as many people as there's as many ways to be a person and a gender and an identity. But because I could only see that other box, little Frankie was like, maybe I could be a boy for a day. That'd be cool. And now I'm like, you were a lot of things and you are a lot of things. And it wasn't quite that, but you were close.